to the National Gallery, Karen and Kiert. We're here in the Mallica, Kapo, Reynolds galleries. And one of the things that I wanted us to discuss today is the apparent gender dynamic within Kapo's paintings and sculptures. One of the things that I've noticed just looking at the work is that a lot of times women appear to be larger than their male counterparts, or they play some truly significant role within the paintings. So I'm wondering, with the works that we have on display right now, what do you make of this narrative? From the perspective of revivalism.
So women have always had a prominent role in revivalism as caregivers, mothers, but not only that, but also as bishops, as healers, as diviners. And also they also have a prominent role within the community. You always hear about the mother coming to warn and so on. So I think those factors also contributed in Kapo's depictions in his art pieces.
Okay. The thing that I find really interesting about what you just said is that, you know, we think about a lot of more anglicized religious practices, let me use that term, where the role of women seems to be diminished in some way, or, you know, men are more dominant within those practices. Is that something that you feel is really contrasting as much?
Revivalism itself is African derived, and women in African spirituality usually have very prominent roles. So unlike mainstream religions where the men are always the head and seen as the head, women are the head in the revival movement. And also in terms of ratio, you have more women than men within these within revival bands, and also the performance of certain rituals. Women are quite central in the performance of particular rituals in revival.
Karen, what I want to actually, and thank you very much, Garrett, what I want to actually try and look at also is, or I know this is kind of an invitation to speculate, but Kapo's own relationship to the women in his life. A lot of the works that he has depicted were of women he knew personally, yes. And a lot of them are very powerful. I mean, we have a work like Revival, Goddess Dina. We have his Adam and Eve, which is actually an autobiographical work. Mm-hmm. In that work, you see his embrace of the woman, and yet she is larger than him. What could that possibly signify in terms of how he saw women?
Yeah. And we are speculating, because I think, as I pointed out earlier, when we look at art, we never actually know entirely what the artist is thinking. Some of it the artist might leave a hint to, but otherwise it's a Rorschach blob. It's a blob that we're looking at, that we're imprinting our own thoughts and images on. And from a sexual psychological point of view, I've always been drawn to Kapo's work because I sense a kind of tenderness in the man-woman depictions, whether it is Wonderful World, as I was pointing out to Kirt, where all the people are nude and all the people are joyful, and it's not meant to be erotic, but it certainly is a sort of Garden of Eden depiction where people don't even think about anything of being nude. That nudity is not nakedness, where nudity is not salacious. The Adam and Eve, again, even though the man is embracing the woman, as you said, the man is smaller in size in many of Kapo's works, but also the man seems to be clinging to the woman who's lifting him up. So I always get a sense of support when you see Kapo having a man and a woman together. the woman is looming larger. She's both Madonna and lover. Even in the lovers, she's larger than him. So she's both nurturing. She's that nurturing lover. So there is that, I wouldn't say dichotomy, but bringing together, synthesis of those two roles that a woman plays with the man and for the man.
So it's that well, I wouldn't really say underlying, it's a very evident aspect of care.
Yes, absolutely. Support,
where the
you
woman,
get that. You really do get that. Yeah. And mutuality, which is what drew me to Kapo's work. When I think about works that are depict any kind of sexuality, embrace, caress, seduction, Kapo's work has a sense of mutuality to it. It's not a man enacting sex on a woman. It's a man and woman engaging in a sexual act that is both erotic and loving, such as the ones on the beach, the lovers on the beach, where you are my plum plum.
Well, no, the interesting thing though is because, again, earlier we were talking about the male gaze, and oftentimes in works by male artists, the male gaze is a very dominant perspective. I don't necessarily see, I don't see that particular aspect of dominance within Kapo's work. As you say, it's something that you look at where there is a tenderness,
yes, there's a lot
towards
of tenderness
women,
for me.
and it's him seeing women in various guises. I mean, we have All Women Are Five Women,
yeah.
where he has depicted women in various roles, you know, the nurturer, the lover, the pious woman, and so on. And in all of that work, though, for me, it's just talking about the multiplicity of aspects, that there's no one way to interpret a woman, there's no one way to see a woman. And I think it's very interesting that Kapo is doing, or has done, works contemplating femininity in that way, when we are in a time now in Jamaica where the way that women are treated is extremely challenging and questionable and problematic, because you know, I think that there is something that is not necessarily connecting anymore. And the thing is, I'm going back to you again, Kiert, because one of the things that I'm thinking about are these very challenging ways that women are treated and seen, depicted, and so on. And even though, you know, Kapo is depicting works and the woman from the perspective of his spirituality, this perspective of his spiritual belief, I feel that it's also a wider way of looking at the feminine. In revivalism, do you see that that is something that is more overarching? I mean, are there any kind of discontents within the viewpoint, within revivalism, in terms of how women are treated, depicted, valorized?
I think Kapo, as a leader, is also depicting his approach to leadership in his artworks. Of course, he's a shepherd. He is expected to be stern and a firm leader, but he's also that nurturer and that caregiver. And if you listen how his daughters speak about their father, you would see a lot of that coming out. Where femininity is concerned, or the divine feminine in revival, you have, for example, the water deity, River Mama. She's a prominent divine entity in revival, and it's interesting. You would normally see men, for example, taking on that feminine role in cases of possession and performing, where the masculine gives way to the feminine within ritual spaces. So of course there's that kind of conversation happening where bodies and performance of gender is concerned within the space. And women within revival spaces are celebrated. They are very much respected and celebrated. There is no demarcation where positions are concerned. They occupy roles such as bishops, pastors, and so on. So they're quite prominent within the movement.
Karen, do you think that in Jamaica generally, there is a lot of anxiety amongst men to, I think the term that Kira uses, to give way to the feminine, to, you know, kind of embody it without fear? Is that something that you think is, and this is a leading question,
yes.
I will admit it. But do you think that there are particular anxieties within our society about masculinity and femininity and the performance of
yes.
either?
Well, I think we don't even have to look very far to recognize that masculinity within our own culture is defined as in opposition to femininity. Everything that is non-feminine is that which is masculine. So anything that creates even the slightest hint of feminization, such as speaking the English language, which is considered book learning, having higher education, not being rough, not being uncouth, not speaking Jamaican, not showing any kind of tenderness. These are not the markers of masculinity for Jamaicans. So I think in a generalized term, clearly there are men who are different from that, but in a generalized term, there's almost a phobia of being feminized. I think we're quite phobic about it in our definition of masculinity, that you don't step anywhere near that thing called the feminine. Two polarities that are not supposed to meet in the middle, and I don't even think the notion of androgyny comes into our vocabulary. I don't think there's any notion of that swapping of power, swapping of essence, being both masculine and feminine. I don't think we have that conception.
But if, and I don't want to go too
Lead
far
away.
away from go too far away from Kapo, but I mean, it is an entry point into a very interesting set of dialogues, because for me, I am wondering if that is one of the reasons why, you know, we have a lot of men seem to have these very challenging relationships with the women in their lives, because they're viewing it as an opposition.
Yes, it's oppositional, it's adversarial, and it's a contestation for power. Because in a situation where a hegemonic masculinity dictates that you must be provider, protector, all-knowing, you are supposed to be in charge, you are supposed to have someone else submit to you. You can barely provide. You certainly aren't protecting, because we're all open to the challenges of violence in our society, social violence, and therefore the man's role as proscribed can't be fulfilled. And now you're going to challenge me even further by telling me that women can do these things. This is a problem, because women are occupying a number of the roles more visibly. They always were, but more visibly than before. And that says, well, what's left for men to do? What's left for the man in this connection? You can't connect with your adversary. It becomes an adversarial role. And if I turn it back to Kapo, this is again what draws me into Kapo. That tenderness that I speak of, that mutuality that I speak of, and Kapo depicts both men and women nude. He doesn't differentiate. The boxer is nude. You would expect him to have boxing gloves and boxing shorts and all the paraphernalia. But he's just a man who has his fists clenched, who is nude. He depicts women as nude, but he doesn't give you an objectified gaze of the woman. It's a human body. It's as simple as that. And you can see that tenderness in the way he treats with it, because he's not emphasizing those parts of her that make her female as opposed to male.
Yes.
You can put those two paintings side by side of women he has known and men he has known, both of them nude, and appreciate them as nudes. They're quite equivalent.
Well, that's actually one of the things, and I'm glad you brought it up, that we, in terms of Kapo's depiction of the body, where the bodies are, there's almost an equality in how he represents
how he depicts
the male and female nude. I mean, sometimes it's actually a little challenging to differentiate between them. It's usually, you know, women are usually, it's easier to see who the gender with the way it depicts here. But I also was thinking while you were talking about, you know, how women are seen to be taking some prominent roles. I was thinking about a work like The Bread Sellers for Kapo, where you look on that work and it's all, the painting itself seems to be dominated by the feminine. But Kapo, speaking about the work, was very much going back into that supportive role.
Absolutely.
That the women are selling the things that the men have worked and produced, and without the women to do that,
it doesn't get to market.
It doesn't get to market. It doesn't. It's like it's part of a unified process. They're going towards a goal.
Precisely.
So one needs the other to achieve that goal.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by that mutuality. That's the mutuality I see in his paintings. That he's not putting one sex, biological sex, above the other, but that he's treating them with the same brush, with the same tones, with the same prominence. And at times we would even say that he is glorifying the woman, because we see the woman as larger, as supporting, as doing all those nurturing types of things, and still she doesn't have to have that Madonna whore dichotomy playing. She can be erotic and nurturing at the same time. And that's what I love about his work. It seems very natural to me.
And you know that I'm going to be very honest, that's a bit unexpected, but I can see it, because the thing is, a lot of times I think the casual viewer would look on the work and see these larger than life women and these smaller than life men, and think that it's some kind of dominance, some kind of domination that is being shown. But it's like when you look on the works and see, even in its abstracted nature, you can still pick up the tenderness that is there. It's always seeming to be gentle.
It's a gentle embrace. It's a gentle entreaty.
Yeah.
Even with my favorite piece, where they're clearly copulating, there doesn't seem to be resistance. There doesn't seem to be any kind of forced entreaty there. You know, and I love that.
Yes. And I think one of the things I am able to reflect on when I view these works is that I think Kapo, in a way, is trying to depict that the relationship between men and women doesn't necessarily have to be a struggle.
Yes, it's not a contest.
It's not a contest, but we all live within a particular environment in harmony. That's the most important thing.
And I think in the one that O'Neill referred to, the Adam and Eve that we were talking about earlier, is that he has a serpent above them. And he seems to be suggesting that when that is disrupted, when that harmony between men and women is disrupted, it's because the serpent has entered. Some temptation has entered, some discord has entered.
Something to disrupt.
Yeah, something disrupts this harmony.
For positive.
Yeah.
I am very happy that we're able to talk about that, because in a lot of times people see these intuitive works and think about them as abstracted from life. I don't think they think about them as something that they can necessarily reflect on and look into their own lives and see either correlation or disparity, and then contemplate why that is. And that's one of the things I believe is really the value of being able to look and experience the work of various artists, and artists particularly like Kapo, because he was extremely prolific. So he has gone through the depictions of these relationships over and over again. Difficulties within the relationships, harmony within the relationships. But at the core of it always seems to be something where no matter what is happening, he has a particular level of respect for women and for the feminine. And it comes out again and again and again, no matter what he's depicting. So...
Well, you know, it's as I say, the Rorschach blob. It's that thing that we look at that isn't any one thing or other, but what we project onto it is really the lesson there. And the beauty of art is that you can look at it 10 times, 20 times, 100 times even, and see something new. because I never tire of looking at his works. Because I've come to the gallery so many times, and I will look for pieces by Kapo just to remind myself of what I find beautiful in it.
But looking on nudity in his work, I mean, even the works that are showing genitalia, like the non-politically correct title, The Cripples, there's still not that overarching aspect of eroticism within it. It seems to be very, again, I'm coming back to the word tender, because works like Wonderful World, where everyone is nude, it doesn't feel like a particularly erotic painting. It's almost pure. There is this kind of Garden of Eden aesthetic that he's going back to, where everything is just in harmony. And that's one of the things I find interesting with his nude figures. There seems to be this kind of movement towards a harmonious life. What do you think about that in relationship to revivalism, this, the consistency of nudity, but also this not necessarily defined role of eroticism within that nudity?
Mm-hmm. There's a way in which society places shame on nudity, and the very conversations we have about grassroots practices such as dancehall, the level of vulgarity in dancehall, and I think Kapo's work really brings that to the fore and in a way contests all of that. And Kapo being a revival leader, there's a level of vulnerability with spirituality in which you have to strip yourself from whatever in order to be taken up within the space, within the ritual space. And I think what Kapo is doing with these work is to show that level of vulnerability, as I said before, within these religious or spiritual spaces. So I think that's important in his depiction of nudity as well.
So do you think then that the extent to which he's depicted so many of his figures as nude is a kind of metaphoric bearing of the self in order to enter that spiritual understanding?
Indeed.
Because even what O'Neill was just saying about, coming back to that word tender, when I look at the cripples, the word that comes to mind is compassion. So even though it's not the same as tenderness that I think of in terms of those erotic pieces, I see a compassion, an understanding for the human condition. And again, we're looking at two cripples who are supposedly nude. So I get why that would be a metaphor for the stripping away.
And I think in order to fully explore and appreciate gender, you have to be in the nude.
Yes,
you have to strip away all of the biases and stereotypes and become vulnerable, or better use of the word raw, in dealing with this particular subject matter.
And yet when he is showing these people in their raw state, it is not a raw brutish state. It is a raw state that makes you, I think I said the term to you, Kirt, you're part of the ecology of the earth.
Yes.
In Wonderful World, there's a lot of greenery and trees, and humans are just those creatures that live within this kind of greenery and sky and sea and sun. So there is an ecological balance in having humans in their natural state.
Right.
But there's also something interesting about the work, The Cripples, though, because the narrative surrounding it is that, and it's interesting that we've been talking about, stripping away and becoming vulnerable. The narrative around it is that they are finding joy in their lives, despite the challenges that they have. So it's like they've kind of dispensed with all of the world's views on them, and they are finding joy in the moment in their lives. I think that's also something that is, it's very interesting, and the layers of meaning that that we are being able to pull out, as you say, is like we are looking at it. He has given us some hints, but there's just so much more that we can get out of it from, you know, just careful attention being given to the works.
And I mean, who says that they're nude? Do they know that they're nude?
Well,
and this is why I made a distinction constantly between being nude and naked. Because I feel naked is exposed, but I find nude to be simply a state of being.
Yes.
It's simply a state of being. There's no judgment when we say this is a nude. You know, when we say naked, we really do mean exposed. And I don't find them naked.
Right.
I don't find them objectified. I find that they're treated as a kind of natural state.
Right. And in certain groups in Africa, nudity is celebrated.
Yes.
It is
Well,
celebrated around the world.
It is the non-celebration of nudity is certainly part of what's left behind from our colonial past, and that kind of Judeo-Christian theology that says that everything that's not covered up is a problem. And very, very Elizabethan notions, 15th century, 16th century Elizabethan notions about exposure of any body part. You know, I certainly don't think that the rest of the world sees the human body and the landscape of the human body in the same way.
No, and it's very interesting that, you know, we're talking about aspects of colonialism and the remnants that just, you know, keep reviving themselves over and over. And in particular, we're looking at a religious practice that has seemingly taken what it wants from the colonial machinery, and I will call it that, and made itself into something that is celebratory of our African heritage. I think that's one of the very important things that we see within Kapo's work, within his depiction of revivalism. So,
and being made in the image and likeness of God, you know, when you reflect on a statement like that, you don't think about clothes.
No, you certainly don't.
Then appreciate who you are in the rawest state, rawest and most vulnerable state.
but also what's really interesting is that when we think about, you know, the statement, you know, made in the image of God, a lot of times because of colonialism, we don't think about ourselves as in that image. And, you know, we've inherited a Christ that is Eurocentric. And Kapo's depiction of Christ was as a black man. So I think that it's very important to understand that, you know, the rewriting and the reinterpretation of our histories is one of the things that leads to ultimate liberation. And I think that's very evident within not just the practice, but in his work.
Indeed, that's true.
All right, well, thank you so much. It has been a pleasure kind of delving a little bit deeper into the works of Mallica Kapo Reynolds. I hope that the people who are able to view this video will get as much from it as I did, but also that they will take the opportunity to come to the National Gallery and see these works in real life. Thank you again for joining me.
You're welcome.
Very well.